Greetings, and welcome back to the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we are joined by Terry Etam, energy executive, best-selling author of The End of Fossil Fuel Insanity, and contributor to the BOEreport.com. Terry's wide range of energy experience includes executive-level positions, writing best-selling novels, and hands-on experience in the field. You can find Terry's writing on the BOEreport.com, as well as his personal website, publicenergynumber1.com. We sat down for a smooth cup of Rose Bros coffee and discussed why high energy prices are bittersweet, the general public's complacency towards reliable energy, misguided energy policies, and a lot more. Enjoy. Also, this podcast is sponsored by headracingcanada.com. Looking for high-performance ski gear this winter? In partnership with four-time Olympian Manny-Osborne Paradis, headracingcanada.com is offering the lowest prices possible through its online storefront by passing brick-and-mortar savings on to customers. Check out headracingcanada.com for more info and get your high-performance ski gear for the upcoming season. So we can start when you're ready.
Sure.
We'll do a rolling start.
Anytime. Got my coffee here, so.
We're live now.
Oh, are we? Okay. I'm sorry I have crappy coffee, but it'll have to do today.
It's no Rose Bros.
No Rose Bros.
Hello, Terry Etam.
Hello, Trevor. Good to see you.
Thank you very much for doing this again.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
It's the third time.
I enjoy your podcasts and your weekly blast. It's refreshing.
I don't think there's anyone else that's been on the podcast as much as you, maybe Cam Proctor. So
wow. And I'm following in the footsteps of Doomberg now, so you're doing well. That's awesome. Doomberg is a must-listen to voice in energy.
Last time we spoke was January of 2022. Oil was around $85 a barrel. It's since gone up big time.
And it's down to $85 a barrel.
And now we're back to 85. So what's happened since we last talked?
So yeah, I'm trying to remember January. It was on the ascendancy then. That would have been the pre-invasion before Russia did their thing. And I think that there had been an energy squeeze developing on the natural gas side and the oil side in late 2021. I think there was a lot of alarm bells going off. There's some forward-thinking people on the oil side, like a guy named Josh Young, who's pretty big on Twitter also. And he puts a lot of science and effort into studying oil markets. And he'd been pointing out for some time, and a few others, but he was the most bang on, that OPEC was nowhere near meeting what they said they were going to do. They pledged to increase production volumes, and they were not meeting what they said they were going to. I think they said they're going to do 400,000 barrels a month increase, and then they were only doing 300,000 some months and 200 other months, and so they were falling behind. And there's been we're ethnocentric, I suppose. Like, we tend to view the world through what's happening here, and the view always was that, well, U.S. shale will come back and flood the market again as soon as the price is high enough, and then we'll be all good again. And that became more apparent that wasn't happening. And then the oil wasn't showing up from the rest of the world. So we started to see the acceleration in prices. And then Russia just turbocharged it because there was a fear that all that Russian volume would be taken off the market very quickly for 4 to 5 million barrels a day of exports, I think. And so that pushed the price up to, I think, $120 some, 124. Then Russian oil, as it turns out, Russian oil is still making its way onto the market, most of it. And the U.S. decided to release a lot of oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And that's those factors have brought the price of oil back down. So
at the time we spoke in January of this year, you were kind of optimistic. I remember at the time you weren't super optimistic. How are you feeling now? Are you more rosy in terms of energy?
There's multiple facets of optimism, and I don't know if you're referring to the oil and gas sector, their likelihood of having a good year. I'm optimistic. I think that the cash flow is going to be off the charts. But at the same time, as a human being, it's terrifying what's happening to the world and what could happen to the world and what is likely to happen to the world because of this energy shortage that is in some ways being masked by this oil prices coming back down from their highs, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And I think that there's gamesmanship being played in the financial markets to suppress prices, which can happen in various trading ways. I think that a lot of OPEC convinced of that as well, that the physical market and the financial market seem to be diverging. There's a widely acknowledged shortage of crude oil in the world, yet prices have been falling for some months. So I think that if we ever start pricing reality in, I think oil prices are going to go right back up, and the pain to the average consumer is going to be off the charts. And that's in the wealthy world, and I can't even imagine what it's like in the developing world. So optimistic, those of us that have survived in the oil patch have worked hard to stay alive for days when prices would recover. And so it's really a double-edged sword to have success, but you see what is happening to the rest of the world. So because we can't produce enough to meet their needs. So
for the listener, today is October 5th. Coincidentally, OPEC cut 2 million barrels out of the market today.
Yes.
Why did they do this?
Which is, so the reason, I think that the reason that they did it is because they're feeling that the markets are being manipulated to artificially suppress prices, as I mentioned, through the Strategic Petroleum Reserve release. And I think they're just really frustrated. And the head of Saudi Aramco has said this, that the physical market and the financial market are diverging, and the world needs more oil. They've been very vocal about this, and for the first time in my memory and lifetime, Saudi Arabia is saying we're not going to be there to meet the world's demands. We're short of oil. And they're saying it in very stark terms. We are short of oil, and people need to understand what that means. And so I think part of it is to see the price mechanism start reflecting this. Part of it is out of frustration. And then there's also a legitimate economic reason in that there's some uncertainty about what the recession that is being, I wouldn't say forced on the world, but the global central banks and monetary authorities are trying to push down inflation by raising interest rates. And that has the effect of cooling off economies, which has the effect of dampening oil demand. So there's a huge question mark of what will that mean in terms of reduced demand, especially on a global basis. We can get a view of what it means in the US, where gasoline consumption has been quite robust. There's been some weakness over summer due to the high prices. And places like China, which is a massive consumer, has been sort of muddled because they've had the weird COVID lockdowns over there and whatnot. So it's a very murky view into what demand destruction will happen. So there's a legitimate reason for them to be saying oil demand could shrink significantly, and if we don't cut production, then the world will be flooded with oil, and then it'll crater prices again, which is a mixed blessing again. So it's nuanced and complex as always. So I have heard that the White House is quite upset, and it makes sense. I don't know. It seems very logical that the U.S. is working hard to reduce oil prices before the midterm elections, because that will help the governing party, whoever it is that's in power. So they don't want to see high oil prices. They're doing whatever they can, and this directly flies in the face of that. So you can take that, spin that whichever way you want in terms of what Saudi Arabia or OPEC wants to see in terms of U.S. elections. There's a lot of interesting angles that come out of it, but yeah, I'll leave that to conspiracy theorists.
Yeah. Another conspiracy is they're colluding with Russia.
OPEC is?
Yeah.
That seems very valid to me. I could see that as being quite likely. Well, OPEC Plus includes Russia. So OPEC Plus, the decision that was made today was a discussion that included Russia. So it had more input from Russia than it did from the United States, for what that's worth. And it's worth a lot. So, yeah.
For the listener, the simple terms is that when you cut production, there's less of it on the market and prices go up. So Russia and Saudi Arabia would be interested in this so they can make more money, in simple terms.
That's right. And for very different reasons. So Saudi Arabia is a very wealthy nation. They're looking to maximize the value of their reserves. They're partly public through Saudi Aramco. Russia is looking for survival, in my opinion, and their European Union is having a boycott of Russian oil imports starting in December. So the Russian sales volumes could fall substantially. So nothing would make Russia more happier than if their sales volumes fall by a third, but the price doubles. They have more oil in the bank for down the road. So it definitely works for them to see higher prices. So
The reason the US is upset is because high prices is bad for the general population, makes prices go up, and Joe Biden is worried about getting reelected.
Right. And high commodity prices are especially oil, is like a tax on every single person. And it's, I wouldn't say a regressive tax, but it hits the lower income the hardest. A lot of people have to drive. Poorer communities don't necessarily live near public transit, or they have to get their kids to school and they can't afford Teslas, and they buy what's on the market and what's cheap on the market. And sometimes that's not a fuel efficient vehicle, but it was cheap, and that's what they require to survive. And so it's brutal, the impacts that it has on the lower socioeconomic strata.
On the flip side, what is $100 oil meant for Canada and Alberta and the industry? What does it mean?
It's huge for an industry. It's huge for, it's helping Canada, definitely, because there's a lot more taxes and a lot more revenue coming their way. It's absolutely helped Alberta in an unbelievable way. Like 2 years ago, we were staring into the abyss of near zero gas and oil prices. Royalties had collapsed. We're going into debt hand over fist. And now we're probably one of the few jurisdictions in the world that's going to be recording budget surpluses. The global economy is so shaky, and Alberta is heading in the exact opposite direction. So it's very welcome for this province and for the parts of Western Canada that benefit from this. So we have paid our dues. It's been a long time of low commodity prices, and the attacks on the industry have been relentless. And ironically, they're just multiplying now that the industry is successful again. The attacks were harsh when the industry was on its knees, and they're more harsh now that it's successful because they're deemed price gougers, which they're not. They're price takers. The industry is producing every molecule it can and would produce more if it could, but it can't. So it's hugely beneficial, but it's a odd euphoria. I would say in past times, it's been a boom mentality and people have felt really good. And I don't know that people feel really good now. I think that it's more like, get me out of here. There's a sense of resignation I feel in the industry. So there's a new optimism around new energy initiatives, which is it's everywhere. It's for people that think that the oil patch is not into new energy and carbon sequestration and cutting emissions. If they came downtown, they would be astonished that the hum of activity that's happening. It's far more discussed and prevalent and growing than the oil and gas production side by a long shot. And it's more well financed, I think. But I think part of what that, and ordinarily that would be just a great reason for enthusiasm and optimism, but there's a tempering there because it's based on government policy, which is subject to change. And there's no one, I've been in 2 or 3 meetings today alone where we've talked about things we would like to progress, but that no one will, because no one will commit capital beyond a period of known government policies. So how do you invest in large capital projects, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars when the rug could get pulled out from you in a couple of years? It's a very hard thing to do.
Energy security. You've written about this a lot in the past, and you've explained your thoughts on all this. And so you know about this and you understand it. And then I saw this tweet the other day from Doomberg, and it was essentially on energy security and how energy is life. What does that mean to the average consumer, and how important is energy in terms of national security? I think it's been pointed out in Russia, but give the listener your thoughts on that.
I think that there's a sense of complacency that develops about anything that we take for granted at every level of society. Probably when you're used to something being there every day without fail, you don't think about it. And energy is one of those things. We've in North America here, especially in Western Europe, we've had cheap energy as long as anyone's known, and we take it completely for granted. We get upset when the price of gasoline gets too high. But until this past year or so, I don't know that anyone's ever noticed even their utility bills. You just don't pay much attention to it. Some people do, obviously, like I said, the people on lower incomes, but the average middle class citizen doesn't really matter to them. So energy is life. It's the not just in the physics sense of the word, but it's cheap energy underpins everything that we have and that we do. it's created everything around us. If you look around your room, everything is there because of cheap energy, and it wouldn't have existed without cheap energy. And we've taken that for granted. We become wasteful with it. We drive hugely inefficient vehicles, and auto manufacturers are quick to jump in there and give us 500 horsepower cars when we need 200 horsepower cars, or that's plentiful, but that's what the market wants. And so look at the size of modern SUVs there and the way we live. It's just the way we live. So energy is life, absolutely, and it underpins everything. And it's been so ubiquitous that we've had the luxury of ignoring the source of it, and now that's starting to go away. And I think the biggest problem is that the energy transition there's this conflict that I don't know how it gets resolved, but there's the people that are that concerned about climate change and what it's going to do to humanity that they've mapped out a world where we have to abandon fossil fuels within the next decade or two. Absolutely have to, as a matter of survival. And that message has been relayed convincingly to a lot of people, and a lot of the younger generation who is even further removed from knowing where things come from than their parents were. And so it's just part of the phenomenon of accepting that things will always be there, a supermarket full of food and a tank full of fuel. So I think the younger generation got caught up, and some of the older generation as well, but got caught up in the idea that this energy transition is happening here, it's happening now, and it's happening rapidly. And you could find 2 million articles that will tell you that on the web, from everyone from Scientific American to CNN to baseball players will tell you that, but it's not true. And it's been more wishful thinking than anything. Is there's the ideas that technology will be there to make wind and solar viable, and we just need more wind and we need more solar, and then we admit it, they're intermittent, but batteries will solve the day. Well, batteries aren't there, and there'll be geothermal, and geothermal isn't working the way that everyone had hoped, and there'll be pumped hydro storage, and that doesn't work the way that everyone had hoped. But at the same time, we've begun dismantling the old energy system. The divest fossil fuel movement has been hugely successful. We have pension funds that shun oil and gas investments. We've had university endowment funds that refuse to invest in oil and gas. So that ship has turned away from oil and gas investment at the time when demand has never been higher, and we need it more than ever. So this is just a mighty earthquake about to happen here, and the wheels have been set in motion. I'm mixing all my metaphors here, but we've set ourselves on this path that it's really hard to turn around on, and the institutions that govern us are so far down the road ideologically that for them to turn around and say everything we told you in the last 10 years is wrong, and we're going to change course and go back in the opposite direction, they can't do it, I don't think. Unless their back is to the wall, you'll see, or we have seen Liz Truss get elected in the UK, and on her first day in office, she reversed the UK fracking ban without any debate, without any hand-wringing, without anything. It's like it's becoming a life and death matter there. So when it gets bad enough, people will change. But again, there's the different pockets of the world where this means different things. Like Europe has been worried about running out of natural gas, so they've been acting accordingly. They've been outbidding the entire world for LNG supplies. Every cargo that comes available, they're saying, we'll take it and we'll pay you the top dollar. So poor Asia without money is unable to secure LNG. Pakistan has been trying for months to secure LNG cargoes, and they can't even get a bid for. They put a bid out and there's no takers. It's not even like a counter. There's just nothing available. So what does a country like Pakistan do? I think they have 130 million people or something. What do they do for winter? How do they resolve this? They go back to coal is what they do. So so does Germany, and so does everywhere else. So the world is in a whole bunch of different pockets. It always has been, but right now on the energy front, even though some things are a global commodity like oil and natural gas is becoming more global, those are the isolation of these various parts of the world, and the repercussions of an energy shortage are going to show themselves in different ways. We're going to slow down traveling. We're going to quit buying new TV sets. We're going to do whatever. In Africa, what do? I don't know. It's not good.
the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The idea was to transition off fossil fuels to help the environment, but in a way it's backfiring. At minimum, you're paying more at the gas pump and you can't heat your home. The worst is that your enemies recognize that and attack you, like Russia.
And the people that can't afford a lot of the world hasn't kept pace with the energy transition, even as we have it here. And so they're left to pick up whatever's left, which means burning wood and dung and coal. Even in Europe, last year in Oslo, Norway, there were air quality alerts because of all the wood smoke. And Norway is one of the richest, if not the richest countries on earth. So what's happening in the rest of the world? So emissions are even going to suffer out of all of this. The thought that emissions are going to fall out of all of this is ridiculous. And then, like you say, then the bad actors come out, like Putin. Putin's war here, I think, has been totally orchestrated around energy. And I think he's decided when he could act based on the fact that he had the EU over a barrel. And what are you going to do now? Stop me. And the US or the EU is in a real pickle now. So, yeah.
It seems like we have abundant supplies in Canada, but it's a supply problem, which is the concern, where it takes years to bring on the extra supply. Do you ever worry about our national security, or is that just a conspiracy theory?
You mean on the energy side or anything? Well, there's a massive irony here, I think, in that in Canada in particular, and to some extent in the United States, is that we've been thwarted from developing access for our products for a very long time, which has driven everyone crazy here and driven a lot of capital out of the market. And one of the consequences of that, though, is that we do have essentially a trapped economy here for our natural gas and to some extent for our oil. And we therefore enjoy the lowest prices anywhere in the world, I would say, for natural gas. And we're absurdly lucky that situation exists today. If there were something like 18 LNG projects proposed for the West Coast, if they had all come to pass and we were shipping 10 BCF a day of LNG off the coast now, the producing community these buildings would be full of money, but our industry here would be paying 5 times or 8 times the price for our natural gas. So what would that have done to industry, and what would that have done to consumers? So we are in a sweet spot in the world right now where every Western Canadian, I hope, is counting their blessings like they never have before. We have ample food, we have water, we have energy, we have everything here. And these sound like silly things to say we're happy that we have energy, but go anywhere else in the world virtually and ask how they're feeling about their energy security. And energy is life. Doomberg is right. It makes everything possible. So,
are we in a new paradigm for energy in North America? Or have things shifted post Ukraine, Russia, and the supply crunch, or is it just the same old supply and demand, and prices are going to crash again?
I don't think prices will crash again. I think I think there's several new paradigms. I think there's a paradigm in the rest of the world that is facing these energy shortages. That's burning coal, that's burning wood, that's paying $50, $60, $70 a gigajoule for natural gas versus the 5 to 8 we're paying in North America. So I think their paradigm is shifted a lot, that energy security is rising to the forefront, and people are going to want to see more supply. In North America, we're still in this luxurious world of low energy, but the tension is huge. The effect that I just spoke of is the US is very acutely aware of this, that because their natural gas prices have risen a lot this year, in part, it's hard to say exactly why, but some people speculate that it's becoming a bit of a link to global prices because they have so much LNG export capacity. And the more LNG export capacity they build to meet the world's needs, which Europe is literally begging for, the more they build that, the higher their cost structure goes for their natural gas. So that the tension there is, as a policymaker, it's an incredible challenge. How do you, especially for the slant of someone like the Biden administration or the Trudeau administration, where you've committed to reducing your reliance on hydrocarbons and moving away from them at the same time the world is demanding more, and at the same time that your very own economy can't be without them either. So the paradigm shift, I think, is this tension that's developing amongst the ruling, whatever you want to call it, class that has to decide how they want to handle us going forward. Within the industry itself, I don't see any signs at all that there will be a boom again and flood the market. And the evidence of that, I would point to virtually any public company that's taking all of their excess cash flow and giving it to shareholders. In days gone by, they would have sunk that right back into the ground. Now, there's some of that happening. I just mentioned I work for a little company that's drilling some wells right now, and the cost is probably 60%, 70% higher than a year ago. We're still drilling the wells because they're economic to do so, but it's mostly just to...
It's on the margin.
Yeah, and it's to keep production flat within our transportation commitments. There's 15 or 20 years ago, if you developed a new gas field, for example, you could build a gas plant and just tie it into the main line and sell your gas, and that was it. Once you had all the permitting and construction done. Now you can't do that because there's no access on the pipeline. So our company or any company here could go develop make a new gas discovery, and there's nothing they could do with it. There's nowhere to pipe to send it down. And that's becoming a problem in the US too. How do you develop new reserves? So that danger, there's a lurking danger here, which will develop over time. And I thought it was going to happen 5 years ago, and I've been way off timing, but it will come, is that as older established fields deplete, every field depletes, then there's infrastructure built to that field. And then what happens when you want to develop a new one? If in the United States, a new shale field develops in Colorado or something, and whoever discovers it tries to build pipelines to connect it to market, and they find their paths blocked, then there'll be no more development of a new field. So the resource that we have here will get squeezed over time, and it's just harder and harder for companies to replace it. So even if you wanted to have a boom, there's a lot of chains around you preventing you from going out and enacting that boom.
It's a great time to be a producer, though, from that perspective, because profits and cash flows at the all-time high. Mm-hmm. Do you worry that the shareholders going to miss out on that, or will they capture that in terms of dividends and buybacks at the end of the day?
But you're right that it's a real oddity what's happening in the stock market. I read an analysis the other day of one of the big brokerage houses in town calculated what publicly traded oil and gas companies, how they're being valued in the market, and they're being valued at roughly $55 oil. So the market has priced their shares as though the price of oil is $55. So it's an incredible discount. So you're right. If you go out and buy oil and gas stocks today, which is what I do, they're generating so much free cash flow. It's almost absurd. I've never seen anything like it, but their share prices don't go up. And historically, the share prices would have just been hauled up by those results. But because of that lack of demand for shares, the big institutional players just won't come back in.
So where does this go?
That's right. So the shares stay mired in a low end of the band, and the companies are incentivized to buy them back, because why wouldn't you? There's one company I follow which is going to generate, is trading around $30, and their free cash flow after they pay all their drilling for this year and next year is expected to be about $12 or $14 a share, which is, so it's ludicrous, the volume of cash that they're spending. So why wouldn't you buy back your own shares or pay dividends? So the incentive is there, and then management incentive structures have changed almost universally. They were 7 years ago, they were, you can go see in the public documents of a company like Chesapeake or something before they imploded, or EQT in the US or other ones. Management was rewarded handsomely for growing production. And that's all gone now. That you rarely see that. There's no incentive to grow production these days. It's more you're rewarded for returning cash to shareholders. So that's what they do. So
everyone keeps saying to hold on to your energy shares because free cash flow is so high, dividends are high, buybacks are high, and the share price will ultimately rise. But we're waiting.
We're waiting.
How long are we going to have to wait?
Well, yeah. And I think there's a few levels of investors for oil and gas stocks. There's a lot to claim to get in when they were at their absolute rock bottom in COVID demand destruction days, and when oil price went to negative whatever in the United States, and prices collapsed of their shares. And if you were lucky enough to get in then, which some people did for sure, I think a lot of those people got out of the market once they'd made 2, 3, 4, 5 times their money. Like it's like, I'm not going to be too greedy here, but some shares, another company I follow is a $20 share. It went down to 90 cents and now it's back up to like $10 a share or something like that. So if you got in at 90 cents and you could sell it for $10, would you do that now? It probably makes a lot of sense, but that same share price at $10, the cash flow that you can earn by buying that share today is better than anything else, any other industry in the market. So why wouldn't you buy it at $10? So there's, if people get in now, you're right. Some shares have been flat for a few years, something that I've owned too, but the amount of cash they're generating is something else. So I think there will be a benefit to shareholders in term, if the shares outstanding just keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. In theory, imagine if a company bought back all the shares except for the ones you owned, you'd own the whole company, right? So, and some of these aren't a trajectory to do that. There's Eric Nuttall puts out that great report where he says the average company in his universe, this was last year, so it's probably even different now. So, but in 3.3 years on average could pay off all their debt and buy back all of their shares. Well, if you held a share of that company and that company did that in 3 years, you would own the company outright.
You'd be a billionaire. Yeah.
So, and he's not making things up. Those are the numbers. That's the cash flow. So
the catalyst is real.
The catalyst is real. And then the flip side, there's still a ton of articles out there. I read them the other day that talking about how a new report came out, one of these mysterious reports that shows up in the news about how banks need to take serious the stranded assets problem of oil and gas companies, that their oil and gas assets are stranded assets. They're going to be worthless as demand for the products drops and as electric vehicles take over. So banks have to deal with this. And some of these solutions or contemplations have been legislated in some places. So it's becoming more of a complex matter now where banks have to say, if this comes to pass, if the global powers that be are pushing us towards net zero 2050, like we've all pledged, then if that happens, then the demand for hydrocarbons should collapse. So therefore that prophecy becomes true. So how do you react on that? When, empirically you can look around and say, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but your government has signed a piece of paper saying you are committed to net zero 2050 and we will take it out of your hide. So how does that play out? I don't know how that plays out. It's an interesting tension in share price valuations for sure. It's
fear of peak demand is leading to the reality peak supply. I don't know if that's true or not, but it kind of sums up that whole fear of the won't need energy in a few years because of all the government actions and all that. And
that's well phrased. Yep. It's I'm not sure that it's quite that clear as a cause and effect, but it's the two go hand in hand. That people, that we are being sold that there's a peak of demand. And that was loud and clear in 2019 before COVID hit. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of voices out there saying that this is the peak for oil consumption. It'll never be higher, which turned out to be not even remotely true. And that the peak of coal consumption was supposed to have happened a long time ago. And now global coal demand and prices have never been higher. So
coal demand is highest it's ever been.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. Yep. It's undoing everything that everyone has tried to. The head of, I think his name's Jeff Curry, head of Goldman Sachs Commodities Research, was on TV the other night with a stat that in the past 10 years, I think he said, the hydrocarbons provided 82% of the world's energy mix. Now it's 81% and at a cost of $3.9 trillion. So that's what that's gotten us. And this year we'll probably be back up over 82% again. So we're running to stand still. So that doesn't mean we should stop trying to make an energy transition work, but I think that there has to be a collective realization that this isn't working.
Energy prices are super volatile right now. One reason I've heard that explained is because the physical markets are separated from the financial markets. What does that mean for the average listener?
For the average listener, I think it means that there is a financial market that is so rich with instruments and trading options and tools that prices can be manipulated in certain directions, which can lead it away from the actual physical demand. Short sellers are a great example of this. People might be familiar with GameStop or some of the ape crowd but short selling has been happening for a long time. But take a company that has decent prospects, but not great prospects, and then has a really bad quarter. Short sellers can jump in and drive the share price of that company right to next to nothing, convincing everyone that it's going to go bankrupt. And now the underlying asset itself is like the physical commodity. It's still fine, but the financial aspect is like the stock market valuation of it, which gets disjointed from the value of that company. So I would say that that's sort of what's happening in the commodity market. And it can't be, some commodities you wouldn't see that happen with, like iPhones, for example. No one's going to if someone drives the price of it down, the iPhones will flood in from somewhere else to reset that price to equalize it. But commodities, it can happen, and companies, it can happen. Anything that's where there's a financial market with tools like that people can manipulate, can cause a discrepancy between an actual physical value and a market value.
And the physical market is literally what people are using every day, and the traders are demanding every day. That's, in layman's terms, what it is.
That's right. The physical market is the daily supply and demand of a product. And there's a lot of murkiness that people tend to assume that there's extreme clarity. Mm-hmm. And we in Canada we have extreme clarity. Like the government requires production to be reported to the nearest tenth of a cubic meter, and that's audited, and it's verified, and it's traced from the producer level to the battery level to the pipeline level so we have very clear data, but that doesn't exist everywhere in the world. And a lot of there's still places in the world where a country's production is estimated by somebody sitting there counting tankers. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? You don't know what that means. You don't know what their production is. That's deliveries. You don't know what they're producing out in the field. I saw a crazy statistic from Bloomberg the other day that if you look at any energy balance in the world, the big ones, the International Energy Agency, or that's the IEA, and then there's the EIA, the Energy Information Agency in the United States, which is a very, very, very credible source of information. They have good reporting standards there too. They always have a balance to market number. So if you take balancing the market is the exercise of adding up all of the supply and then subtracting all the demand, and it should all balance, plus or minus storage. It should be equal. But there's always a line balancing item. Bloomberg published a chart showing the amount of unbalanced supply in the U.S., the amount that can't be accounted for. And it's currently over 1 million barrels a day, 1.1 million barrels a day. Now, the U.S. consumption is about 20 million barrels a day. So 5% of it is unaccounted for. They can't even explain it. But yet the market will move enormously. If there's a headline tomorrow saying 300,000 barrels a day falls off the market because something gets shut in, the market will react to it. But that's well within the error bar of every month the EIA saying there's 1 million barrels a day we can't even account for. So there's a lot of imprecision in the physical market, which shows up now and then when people will restate. The EIA, for example, restated gasoline consumption over the summer. They'd said it's fallen a lot, and then they restated and said, actually, it's 400,000 barrels a day higher than we said, just because we've compiled all the data now. So the physical market is always correcting itself as the data becomes finalized. And so there's the physical market isn't perfect in terms of valuation either. And then the market tends to react to those fluctuations as well. So it's a complicated business to try and keep exact tabs on.
But the reason for the volatility is the financial markets are kind of playing havoc in what the price in
I would say that the financial tail is wagging the dog, very much like commodity prices tend to overshoot always. When there's a fear of a shortage, people bid it up through the roof. And when there's a fear of an oversupply, people dump it. And then, so that's how the boom bust nature of the commodity business, of any commodity, but oil and gas has been the most. I think natural gas is one of the most volatile commodities, mainly because it's so critical yet not as transportable as everything else. So, but you see it in copper, you see it in other things as well, and the volatility is just heightened now because we're on that edge of demand, where there's the price signal isn't doing what it's supposed to. So then the market panics even more. So if the price signal in the old days, if the price of oil went up by 10% and you saw a drilling rig reaction, then it would morph up to match that, so to speak. Now the price of oil goes up by 20% and you don't see any drilling rig reaction. So then the price goes crazy. But then you read, then the price going crazy causes demand destruction. So then you see the first tea leaves being read says there's demand destruction, and then the price craters again. So it's this being on the edge with no clear path towards secure supply, I think, is leading to the volatility.
Well, I think that's a great summary. Thanks for sitting down and sharing your wisdom with the listener. Everything from energy supply and security, the volatility, record revenues to the governments. Thank you. It's great to check in and get your thoughts.
Yeah, well, such as they are. Yeah, it's fascinating times.
It is.
For better or worse.
Yeah. We'll leave it there until next time.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.